I went home and I just couldn't stop thinking about her.
When you're in country and you're sitting still and idle, that's a bad sign.
She no longer had a heartbeat. She wasn't breathing. And I was the first one on the chest. I started compressions first.
Need advocates. We need people that are going to hold companies, government, hold these people accountable.
All right. Welcome to the Heroes Debrief. We want to thank everybody for tuning in on our last episode. We greatly appreciate the amount of support and activity that we wound up getting on our YouTube channel as well as the audio platforms as well. The Heroes Debrief is a podcast for veterans and first responders to come in and share their experiences and tell their perspectives on the military and first responder lifestyle. The Heroes Debrief is produced by Hero Services, which is a veteran and first responder as well as licensed healthcare professionals nonprofit. We provide resources and recognize those individuals for their service. We want to thank our principal sponsors, which are Window World and Bathworks, and our newest principal sponsor, Paul Davis. They provide the opportunity for us to wind up doing this podcast as well as helping us sponsor our events while we're doing fundraising. I'm your host, Jordan White, U.S. Navy veteran, current working paramedic, and my co-host is Chrissy Easton.
Hi, all. My name's Chrissy, and I've been a medic for about 14 years now. I was a former member of the SRT team, Special Response Team, and I also currently teach for the American Heart Association. I teach PALS and ACLS. We'll get into that later.
So Chrissy and our guest Andrew Candler are also players for the Strikes for Stripes event that is coming up on September 9th. We have our jerseys out on display today for the podcast. The green and the white jerseys back there are our new jerseys for this year's event. And we are eagerly anticipating that day. It's going to be quite a big day. You can get tickets on our event webpage, which is going to be in the show notes below. And we hope to see you there at Cornerstone University on September 9th. Gates will open at 6 p.m. with the pregame ceremony starting at 7 p.m. So, Andrew, thanks for coming out. You are a Sergeant First Class with the U.S. Army. Current, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And tell us a little bit about growing up and prior to you getting into your military career.
So I grew up in, I just say Gwinnett County, Georgia. I kind of moved all over the county a little bit, so I don't really claim a specific city. If I did, probably be Lawrenceville, if you want to look it up. But yeah, just, somewhat small town lifestyle. It was, bigger than a lot of places around here. But yeah, I grew up there, graduated high school in 2003, and 2 weeks after high school, I started basic training. So yeah, I didn't really waste any time. Grew up with my mom. My parents were separated when I was real young. I spent some time with my dad periodically, but mainly grew up with my mom. So
what were some of the things like while you were growing up that kind of led you into pursuing military service?
So I have, a military background in my family. Both my mom's brothers are both retired Army. One 20 years as a Sergeant First Class, and the other one 22 years as a First Sergeant. I hope I got those years right. One of them was 20, one of them was 22. So I'm sure they'll yell at me later if I'm wrong, but it is what it is. Both my granddads, on both my mom and dad's side, both served. My granddad on my mom's side, who still, was one of my mentors. He passed away in 2002. But he served, in the reserves and National Guard, um, mainly in Pennsylvania, where my grandparents grew up and where my mom was born. They moved down to Georgia into Lilburn, which is part of Gwinnett County, Georgia, when my mom was about 6 months old. So he served both in Pennsylvania and down in Georgia. Just did all the part-time stuff. He really didn't want to give it up. He absolutely loved the military lifestyle, and both my uncles, loved the military lifestyle. My granddad on my dad's side, and my dad also served in the National Guard for a few years during the Vietnam era. But his dad, my granddad, he served with all of his brothers during World War II. So that's kind of a historic thing. All the brothers all served together, and hearing those stories at like family reunions. Growing up, I mean, we don't have those types of family reunions anymore. But I remember going to those when I was a kid and just hearing all them talk about what they did, and it was kind of cool. And then I have a couple cousins that joined on both my dad's side and my mom's side. Um, I joined as military police, and my cousin on my mom's side also was military police in the army, so that was kind of cool. We never got to serve together, but it's kind of cool doing the same thing. And then one of my other cousins on my mom's side, he was in the Marine Corps for a few years in the early 2000s, so that was kind of cool.
So why military police?
I always had kind of a passion for law enforcement, and my
Okay.
granddad, who on my mom's side, who did all the part-time stuff, he also was law enforcement. So he worked for Gwinnett County Police Department for years down in Georgia. He loved doing things for others. It was kind of just service to your community was really big, and that's kind of my mentality with it as well. Helping out as many people as you can. He did that, and then it's kind of funny because my cousin that was also an MP actually works for the same department that our granddad worked for. So he's currently
Awesome.
working Gwinnett County Police Department. I think he's a sergeant right now.
Through the generations. Nice.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I did
So-
the law enforcement stuff, but I was also did a law enforcement explorer program when I was in high school, which was really awesome.
Tell us about that. Because we
So-
don't have things like that around here.
Actually, they do.
Oh, they do. See, I
It's-
certainly
it's not
don't
as
know
popular
enough.
as it is down south. But it's kind of like so some high schools have like a junior ROTC where they have military aspects of it, teach you discipline and stuff like that. Well, the law enforcement explorer program kind of does the same thing. And down in Georgia, I know they had, of course, the law enforcement one that I was a part of with the Lilburn Police Department in Gwinnett County. They also have a first responder one other than police. They have a fire explorer program. They have a paramedic explorer program. And you'd always go to Gatlinburg, Tennessee in late January, early February, and go compete in competitions all for everybody all over the Southeast. It was amazing.
So, when you were growing up and having that amount of family members that were prior service, like, was that talked about? Like, how much did that like influence you going forward? Like, was your family like very military structured, or was it just kind of whatever, and this is just like an option?
It was a little structured. I've always said that my mom was my uh, harshest drill sergeant. So she definitely needed things done specific ways. Everything had to be done kind of like that. And she never served in the military. Honestly, I think she probably would have done fairly well. She has been in the healthcare field since I was, 5, 6 years old. But she, it was definitely structured. I think she had kind of a military aspect to it. I did have, a stepdad that at the time he was in the National Guard. So I didn't have elements of the military specifically in our household per se, but we did know about, all the different things that, happened in military families. And, my mom grew up with, her dad, doing part-time service and stuff like that. And then, both my mom's brothers were active duty. And at one point, all of them were stationed in Germany. So it's, we were kind of the only family members that my grandparents had directly in the area, especially since they moved from Pennsylvania when my mom was 6 months old. So, I mean, we had some structure, but not specifically because of military. It's just my mom wanted things done specific ways to keep the house running.
Right. I was just going to ask that. And you said that you spent some time with your dad growing up, but mainly it was with your mom. So was she a single mom? Did you have, was she a single mom throughout? Did you have siblings? So I could imagine she kind of had to run a tight ship in order to get things done.
She had to run a tight ship, and I was expected to do a lot of things to help her out.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the only.
The only.
I am the only. So she got it right the first time.
Yeah.
I probably would have benefited from, having a older or younger sibling. I mean, when I joined in 2003, all of a sudden I got, over 1 million brothers and sisters. So, I mean, that's kind of cool. But I never really had, siblings growing up. I did have a step brother at one point, and he actually joined the Marine Corps. I actually, talked to him, periodically. Mainly it's just, it's his Facebook birthday, happy birthday. That's really the extent of it. But he served in the Marine Corps, and, he, I don't know where he works now, but he's still down in Georgia. He's part of, a couple different Marine Corps organizations because, it is the Marine Corps.
So it sounds like there was definitely a family aspect of military life.
Yes.
That influenced you as you grew up.
Yes.
Also, the law enforcement side.
Oh, yeah.
Which you said, what was it? The law enforcement?
The Law Enforcement Explorer program.
Yes. And that, you've mentioned that a few times. And that sounds like, did that just propel you into wanting to be more law enforcement, more military? Was it a good thing for you?
I think it was a good thing, especially because, the junior ROTC that, high schools have, they provide that little bit of discipline and structure, and, they propel you forward to hopefully, be successful. It's not like a recruitment thing, but just to give you that aspect of structure and discipline. And I think everybody can benefit from that. But having it on two sides,
especially teenagers,
with both the but having it on two sides with both the military and the law enforcement was very good. I very much enjoyed it, especially those competitions we went to.
Competitions.
So every, the end of January, early February, every year, everybody all across the Southeast in these programs would meet in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and compete.
How fun!
Yeah, we'd compete on felony traffic stops. That was my forte. I was really good at felony traffic stops. I ended up, me and my partner during, I think it was my junior year of high school, we actually won the competition in Gatlinburg. So that was kind of cool.
How big are these competitions? You said organizations from around. I mean, that sounds like a pretty big production.
Oh, yeah. It's,
big thing down there in the South.
Well, I mean, just imagine, DeVos Place, how big that place is. Imagine that be just partitioned off with all these different competitions going on. And there's, almost 50,000 people all standing around doing all these competitions. And the people that put this on, they are really good at logistics because they get people, to the specific point that they need to be every single time. But but it also has an aspect of fun to it. Because every year they would do it wouldn't be like a karaoke competition, it'd be like a parody. Have you ever heard of Cletus T. Judd? He does parodies of different songs, or like Weird Al Yankovic.
Okay.
They do parodies of, popular songs and, make them their own. We got to dress up and do different things with songs and make parodies of songs or dance to a song, and seeing that competition, just having fun and being a kid because we were kids.
Yes,
that it definitely made it worthwhile.
Wow, well done to the state of Georgia and these organizations, because it sounds like they really balanced introducing like law enforcement potential careers to you kids, but also had fun. And I mean, that sounds like a really good gig when you're a teenager. So, what year was this when you went through?
So the last competition that I remember going to was actually in 2001. I did go to it in 2000 because I started high school in 1999, August of 99. So 2000 and 2001, I went to those competitions in Gatlinburg. When I went in 2001, I was actually the captain of our Police Explorer program. So I was kind of the guy in charge. So that was, kind of cool.
What month in 2001?
It was, the end of January, early February. I think that one was like the first weekend in February.
Okay.
But, it was, 22 years ago. So,
Sure.
I will remember as much as I can.
And how old were you?
Uh,
You said you were You were the captain.
Now you're trying to make me do math.
Just
I did
roughly.
get a good score on my ASVAB, but, that was in, 2002.
So you were like
so-
sophomore, freshman, junior? I mean,
I was a sophomore.
Okay.
I started junior year in the fall of 2001. So that summer I turned 17.
wow.
Yeah.
Because 2001 was quite a year from
Oh,
military
yes.
and law enforcement standpoints.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
We're going to take a moment to talk about our principal sponsors. Not only have these businesses assisted Hero Services with our fundraising events, but they have also provided assistance with supporting the Heroes Debrief. Window World, Bathworks, and Paul Davis continuously show support to Hero Services as we set out to recognize and provide resources to our veterans, first responders, and licensed healthcare professionals. So you sound like you've joined relatively about the same time I did. So I shipped out in 2003.
Yeah.
When did you?
I started basic June 11th, 2003.
Okay. So
that's
we
when I
only
got to Fort Leonard Wood.
we only miss each other by a couple months. So when did you decide that you were like really going into the military? When was that decision made?
That was made probably, middle school, early high school. I kind of knew that I was going to do it because I knew I couldn't pay for college. I honestly, after, being at school for years and years and years, I didn't want to go back into a classroom. I wanted to actually go do something. I wanted to use my hands. I wanted to, be productive. If I wouldn't have joined the military, I would have gone into a trade. I know that. What kind of trade? Probably something in the mechanic world because that's what my dad did for so long. And, in middle school and, early high school, I remember going to his shop and, helping out, learning how to, do things with cars and stuff like that, which, it has been beneficial and given me kind of, the ability to work on my own vehicles, do my own oil changes. Although I refuse to do oil changes because it's actually cheaper nowadays to have a place do it for you. But anything needs to be repaired. I know how to do it. I know how to do full brake jobs. I actually had to do, some very complicated work on a front wheel drive car that, myself and my ex-wife used to own, and it needed a rear main seal, had to drop the transmission, do all this stuff. But the basic ability that my dad kind of allowed me to have by helping him at the shop allowed me to, do that kind of stuff. But that was, to me, that was my backup, was to become a trade. Because a lot of people that I knew, especially in high school, when I told them, I'm joining the military, I didn't know specifically, Army or Marine Corps, Navy and Air Force, that wasn't really in my wheelhouse. I wanted, either Marine Corps or Army. And that was my primary plan. Everybody else was, oh, military's your backup. No, military was my number one choice.
So coming back to 2001,
Yeah.
Where were you during September 11?
So when the first plane hit, it was at the end of, I want to say, second period. It may have been the end of third period.
Mm-hmm.
But that was when the first plane kind of hit. Um, we had our change for period going to your next class, and then my next period was Spanish. Well, the Spanish teacher I had, he was a really good teacher. He, was not from Mexico. He's from the U.S. Learned Spanish, loves the language, and that's what got him into teaching Spanish because he just had that passion. He had that drive. That's something that teachers need. And that was the first and only day that entire semester that he spoke English the entire class period. Because the first plane hit while we were in the previous period, our principal or his secretary, one of the two, were watching the news because they just had the news on in their office. And that all happened after the class change. Announcements were made. The every teacher in the entire school turned on the news, and we actually saw the second plane hit live on TV at school. So I was in Spanish class in 2001 watching the second plane live, and then we got the news break that the plane hit the Pentagon, and then of course everybody found out about the one in Pennsylvania that went down. But yeah, I remember exactly what I was doing and where I was.
So how did that, or did it even change your perspective as far as joining?
I already kind of knew I was joining.
Mm-hmm.
It did not change that aspect. The only thing it kind of changed with me is I wanted to do something where I was going to deploy because I knew that was going to happen because both my uncles fought in the Gulf War in the early 90s. So I definitely knew a deployment was going to happen. I knew people were going to be going overseas. I knew for a fact that was going to happen. So I wanted to be a part of that. So not the service didn't change, but maybe the way I went about it did.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted to be military police just because of the law enforcement stuff, because I enjoy law enforcement. Although, military police, there's a lot more to it than just law enforcement. I really didn't do law enforcement for, almost my first 9 years in the Army. But I kind of had the opportunity when I did enlist to choose where I wanted to go. So I chose Fort Stewart, and down at Fort Stewart, they have the 3rd Infantry Division. I was with the 3rd Infantry Division for, the majority of my career up until I got into, recruiting. And I knew a lot about 3rd Infantry Division specifically because one of my uncles deployed with them in the Gulf War. So I knew they were going to deploy. So when I chose to go to Fort Stewart, I kind of knew that I was going to be able to have that opportunity to deploy and do the combat side of it as well.
How are you able to choose? Because the minimal amount that I know is that you kind of get told where you're going. So was this a military police aspect that you could choose where you wanted to be as a young recruit?
So
Is that even
at the time
accurate?
when I signed my contract on June 18th, 2002. And I still had my entire senior year ahead of me. So I signed, almost a year before I actually started basic training. But at the time, you were given an option from, you could choose where you wanted to go if it was, one of these like 3 or 4 different places.
Okay.
So
it's
one of those places was Fort Stewart. So that's why I kind of chose that.
Okay.
And it was probably based on, everything that was happening at the time, because that was in 2002. Everything happened in 2001. So they wanted people to, if people wanted to go to these specific areas, they knew they were probably going to deploy. So that's why I chose Fort Stewart. I knew exactly where I was going to go after. I am a fan of homeostasis. So I'm not a huge fan of change. So if I knew for a fact where I was going to go, I could plan.
Okay.
So my family could plan.
Yeah.
My mom knew where I was going, and it made her happy. I was only going to be 4.5 hours away.
Great. That makes sense. It sounds like it all worked out in that aspect.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And you said you were eager to contribute.
Yes.
and to kind of get this ball rolling, right?
Yes.
So is it so it sounds like 9/11, which I remember where I was. My gosh, I was in college. I was cleaning my room before a class, and I had the news on, and I turned around, and there goes the plane, the second plane in the World Trade Center. And my phone rings like 30 seconds later, and it's my parents going, fill up your gas tank and get home. You're like, because I was an hour and a half away from home, but fill up your gas tank and get home. Like they were, but that was like the mindset of everyone. You said your Spanish teacher spoke English the whole time, which was not the norm.
It kind of freaked us out a little bit.
I bet it did. Yeah. Wanting everybody to totally understand what was going on. So it sounds like that kind of propelled you into, all right, let's get this done. Yep. Let's move. And then, so you went to
Fort Leonard Wood.
Leonard
Fort
Wood?
Lost in the Woods in the state of misery. It's kind of what we call it. We've got all these, we can make fun of it. You can't. I'm just gonna say that. But yeah, it's Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It's halfway and somewhat halfway between, St. Louis and Springfield. So it's out in the middle of nowhere, but it gets way too hot in the summer and way too cold in the winter. So I started in June, and you had a heat index. We graduated in October, and we had a wind chill and snow on the ground. And it's like, I'm from Georgia. We don't deal with snow. So it was a little bit of weird for me because I don't deal with, you get a dusting of snow in Georgia and be like, boom, hey, I get a day off from work. Yeah, everything shuts down. But y'all get a tornado up here and you freak out.
Before we get too much into you shipping out to boot camp and all that, so you knew that you were enlisting prior to 9/11. What was the reaction for your family and friends that knew that you were enlisting post 9/11, like that first initial time period? Because it was pretty awkward for me, because I was like you. I wound up knowing that I was going to enlist. And when the day happened, like, especially with my friends at school, things got real awkward. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what was your experience in that?
So a lot of my friends, they knew prior to 9/11 that I was joining the military. It was kind of up in the air which branch at the time. And they all took it as, oh, that's your last resort. You don't have any other options. That's kind of their thought process behind it, even though no matter what I told them about, that is my number one choice. This is what I'm going to do, just because I knew the lifestyle because of family members. And I knew I would be taken care of. My future family would be taken care of, stuff like that. But after 9/11, they're like, I see what you're doing. A lot of them kind of changed their path. So I know of 5 people in my graduating class from the Marine Corps Junior ROTC that I was a part of at high school. All 5 of us went. Myself and another were Army. 3 of them were Marine Corps. Sorry, none of them were Navy. It is what it is. There was one person from our graduating class that joined the Navy, but it was like 2 years later. But we had 5 of us that I knew about that joined during high school to be going to basic training or boot camp right after we graduated. But their aspect of it changed with 9/11. Their backup became their primary, while my primary never changed. They just understood why it was my primary at that point.
Yeah.
They got to my level.
So, like, for me, like, it was a long time ago. I don't really remember that there was like a whole lot of people running out to enlist like our senior year or whatever. It kind of felt like, for my perspective, is it was like me and maybe like 2 other guys or whatever, and we had more individuals that wound up joining after they had been graduated for a year or 2, and then like realized that, oh well, I'd rather go serve in the military at the age of 20 rather than straight out of high school or whatever. Anyways, so for me, I remember as we were swapping through classes and stuff like that, you know how the high school hallways are all loud and obnoxious and all that stuff, like teenagers are. As soon as I wound up getting into the hallway, like everything shut down. Everybody went totally silent, and they just watched me walk past, because now they knew there was a high potential of me going to war. And I don't really think that my parents wound up. My parents already had one son in the military at that point, and they were familiar and they were aware of everything. So they kind of took it with a grain of salt. But like, what was your reaction from your mom? And like, what was that sort of situation like, or other family members, close friends, and stuff?
Um, so I'd already enlisted when my mom's dad, my granddad, passed away. He passed away the night before my first day of senior year of high school. That was in August of 2002. I signed my contract in June. Um, from him, he was overly ecstatic, absolutely proud. He was excited for me. He wanted to see how I was going to treat the military, because he always lived vicariously through his two sons who both retired Army. And I, my grandmother didn't really. She was like, "Oh, well, that's good." She, sweet old Southern lady, even though she was from Pennsylvania. Love her to death. She's still, she's still giving me a hard time. She's still giving my mom a hard time, but she does it with a smile on her face. Um, my dad, he didn't care really either way. He was excited that I was doing something. My mom, she was typical mom, and being a recruiter now, I understand what's that like and what my recruiter went through. But I think she was a little bit better than most moms. She was excited for me, but scared at the same time. That nervous, scared mindset. Um, but she knew what I was getting into. She knew what I wanted, and she wasn't going to stop me from achieving my dream. She just shed a tear in the process.
Yeah.
So, and she's done that quite a few times over my entire career. But there's been people that have helped reassure her, especially with my deployments and stuff like that.
I'm a mom. I have a 6-year-old boy, and he's going to be my only one. And I could not imagine that moment. I know he's little, and I haven't seen him become a man yet, but I know I see his baby face every time I look in his face. So I wonder, being a mom, that must be so conflicting. Were you conflicted because she was, or were you just like, "It's fine, mom, you'll be good. let's go."
I mean, I was a typical teenager. I didn't really say much at the time.
Right. Yeah.
I was a little rebellious at times,
Yeah.
especially helping her with laundry. She always told me to put the clothes in the dryer. She never told me to turn the dryer on. I'm just gonna say that she never told me.
Oh, you typical man.
I mean, I'll own it. It's fine. But I think always, even now, I've been over 20 years for about 2 months now of service, and
Well done.
she still, I think, sees this little boy, this toddler dressed in a camouflage uniform.
Ah,
So it's, I see, somebody that's, getting ready for my first deployment, somebody that's, completely ready. I've been trained. I've got all this gear. It's heavy. I don't want to carry it, but I've got it. It's going to protect me. But she still sees this little boy with a little backpack going to play Army.
was she particularly protective of you
Yes.
because you were the only?
Yes.
So when you went to your basic training, what was her reaction?
She wanted me to leave while she was at work, to go to, the hotel for that night and, to ship off the next morning. I think that probably played a lot into, she didn't want me to see her cry.
Mm.
So my recruiter picked me up from the house and took me to my mom's work so I could say goodbye to my mom. But I think that was all kind of a plan that, they worked out together. I don't really remember it, but, my recruiter took me to my mom's work so I could say goodbye. I think that was beneficial to me because I didn't see her cry. I didn't, see her get emotional because, you see your mom get emotional no matter who you are. If you had a close relationship, you're going to get emotional.
Yep.
So she didn't want me to get emotional or get nervous or get scared, which, I already knew what I was getting into in basic training. I was going to get nervous and scared no matter what. But, it is what it is. Um, but I think she handled it well for my sake.
Good. That sounds like that worked out well for you.
Yes.
Did she get more used to it over the years?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I
Imagine
think
that first time you leaving must be pretty tough on a parent. But.
Yes. I mean, I turned 19 a week after I graduated high school, and the next week I was in basic training on my own for the first time in my life. And for her first time for 19 years, she doesn't have me at home.
Adjustments all around.
Yes, homeostasis was not kept. So
what was your first day at boot camp like?
So the first time you get in there, it's, you get into reception, where you're in processed into the Army. You don't actually start basic training yet. But you meet a drill sergeant right when you get off the bus, and they're already screaming at you. You're yelling at you. You don't get off the bus the right way. You don't know how to breathe right. You don't know how to, stand up right. You don't know how to do a push up the right way. But darn it, they're going to teach you how to do it pretty quick and in a hurry. But yeah, over the next 4 or 5 days, you're in reception, just getting used to it. You have drill sergeants, but they're not like in drill sergeant mode. I didn't know, what was expected of actual basic training, but you got your uniforms, your civilian bag you brought with you goes away, it goes on a truck. Then you get, the following weekend, you get shipped over to your basic training company, and you've got all these big hats around you. You're like, okay, so it's about to start. And you're feeling confident, you're feeling good. That first drill sergeant gets on the bus, starts yelling. You're like, I fucked up. I don't know what to do.
Why is everybody screaming?
Yeah, and you get off the bus, and it's like everybody is yelling at you, and
Did
it's crazy.
Did they throw your paperwork all over the floor saying it was stacked wrong and all that?
No, but they threw somebody's duffel bag about 20 feet, and these duffel bags were heavy. They're full of our stuff. This guy literally just tossed somebody's duffel bag and be like, "You're not holding this the right way. Go pick it up." And I'm like, I'm just gonna stand here and be like, I don't know what to do. It's like Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands. So yeah, you file all in line. But the scary part about it is when you get off, you're already told what line you're going to get in. You didn't know at the time, but that is your platoon you're going to be in. We had 4 lines, and I was in the 3rd line, so I was going to end up in 3rd platoon. I was one of the first ones off the bus. So I'm not short by any means. I am 6'2" and 3/4, 6'3", and I'm the second guy in line, and the guy in front of me is like 5 foot nothing, and he's standing right at that cone. I'm right behind him, and I can see everything over top of him, and I am just staring at this drill sergeant who's the same height as the guy in front of me, and he has this, no emotion on his face, because we didn't know it, but those are our senior drill sergeants. Those are basically the ones in charge of your platoon. You've got all the other drill sergeants who are, they're based like assistants, I guess. But you got 3 drill sergeants in every platoon. So all the other drill sergeants are running around screaming at people, and you've got this one drill sergeant just standing there, and I'm like, you get nervous. You're like, is he gonna snap? But when he snaps, is it gonna be my neck? So it's a little bit crazy, and it was called the shark attack for years and years and years. You get off the bus, and every drill sergeant's yelling at everybody. But yeah, that first day, you will never forget it a day in your life.
I'm assuming they still do that, right?
They've changed things up a little bit. It's not called the shark attack anymore. It's called the first 100 yards. So you do like some competition stuff, I think, for the first 100 yards going from that bus to your actual base training company. But you still got the aspect of the drill sergeants. They're still yelling.
Okay.
That's
They
that's
didn't dumb
not
it.
going away.
They didn't dumb it down too much.
No.
Okay.
If you go to basic training, now you're still getting yelled at.
Okay.
It's part of it. Get
Mhm.
used to it. If you're going to end up peeing your pants when somebody yells at you, basic training is not for you.
Right. Yeah. Which I think that there was those guys. There was a lot of different walks of life coming into.
We had somebody piss themselves because
Yeah.
he was scared out of his mind. But he had 2 drill sergeants, one on each side. One yelling at him to put his duffel bag down. The other one's yelling at him to pick it up over his head, and he literally had no idea what to do. And he got so scared when the female drill sergeant came into his face and was like, "You don't know how to listen to either one of these drill sergeants." And he just got so scared. But he was about 6'5". The female drill sergeant's about 5'2".
And way scarier.
And
It was for me, anyways.
yeah, he's looking a foot above her head, and she's yelling at him. And I started to smirk, but I'm kind of a smart aleck. So I don't really have any like big basic training stories minus that. I mean, there was a lot of good times. I still talk to a few people I went to basic training with, and we had a great time. I will never forget, most of those guys. I actually, saw a few of them later on down the road. Like I saw one of the drill sergeants from one of the other platoons on my first deployment. That was kind of cool. The only problem was he wasn't in my platoon, but still knew who I was.
Okay, so you said you're a bit of a smart aleck, yeah?
Yeah.
So you're almost 6'3" and a bit of a smart aleck. How did that influence your basic training, or did it not? I mean, I'm not one to stay quiet. And I imagine, like, when I'm very nervous or very scared, sometimes I have a little verbal diarrhea. You kind of strike me as maybe somebody that doesn't stay entirely quiet when you're nervous. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket?
Yes. Oh,
So
yeah.
Private Joker, how
Oh.
he's first introduced as Joker.
Oh, no.
That
No.
was me. There was a couple of us.
Oh, Candler,
but,
I'm so sorry.
When every drill sergeant in your entire company knows who you are by week 3, probably not a good pat on the back.
How'd that set you up?
Well, they all knew who I was. So,
In a good way?
sometimes later on during the AIT portion, it was probably a good thing, especially once, all the drill sergeants knew where everybody was going. So, yeah.
What is AIT?
So AIT is your advanced individual training.
Okay.
For me, it was military police.
Is that when you're put into whatever job you're going to have in the
Yes.
military? Okay.
Yes. So, but usually you go to basic training and, 10 weeks later, you're now a soldier, and then you go somewhere else for your job training, for your AIT.
Mhm.
I didn't have that. So we have what's called one station unit training, and you start basic training and you don't graduate until you graduate from AIT. I was there for 17 straight weeks, same drill sergeant, same bunk, same wall locker, same company headquarters, same chow hall, same everything. And that's only typically for like combat arms jobs in the Army, like infantry. They, nowadays theirs is like 22 weeks long. So you have the same drill sergeants for 22 weeks as opposed to just 10, like just normal basic training.
So how common is that for the Army? Because that is way foreign to the Navy.
It's only a handful of jobs.
Okay.
And military police is like the only non-combat job that it actually does it for.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was 17 straight weeks, which nowadays it's 20.
Yeah.
So it's kind of extended a little bit. And at one point it went up to 22. It went down to 18. Now it's back up to 21. It's like 22 weeks and 6 days.
So I find that really interesting because, like, from my experience, which I think is probably more normal experience from military members, is when I went through boot camp, I was with a group of guys that was 80 people. My division was 80 people.
No.
2.5 months later, we're done with them. I get shipped out to Pensacola, wound up going through my A school, which is a job specific AIT, basically, is where I was getting trained as a mechanic. And then I wound up meeting an entirely new group of, I don't know, might have been like probably like 40 guys in my class, but you're showing up with multiple classes. So I wound up showing up with like probably a group of 150, lost track of those guys 2.5 months later. And then by the time I wound up getting to my parent command, like, so I didn't wound up the first 6 months of my enlistment, I was meeting new people every month. Like it was just so hammered out and cyclistic that your group had to wind up becoming pretty close knit going forward.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you're there for 18 weeks.
That's great.
So it's 17 weeks, 6 days. So we just call it 17 weeks. But yeah, I was with those guys for from June of '03 until October when we graduated. And of course, everybody goes their separate ways. But because you're graduating from your job training, everybody knows where you're going. So we kind of knew where everybody else was going to end up going to. And it was 4 other guys with me going to Fort Stewart. So, and I still talk to 2 of those guys.
So that was going to be my next question. Is like, how many of those guys do you know today? Because especially out of boot camp, I don't even know if they exist anymore. Like I haven't talked to them in years and years since we graduated boot camp. So that's pretty interesting because that's for the viewers that are out there. That's not normal process for the military. So,
but I still talk to several people that I was in basic and AIT, that OSIT training with. One of them I ran into. He was actually a warrant officer, so in between the enlisted and the officer world.
Mhm.
I ran into him in, I want to say it was like 2013, 2014. There was a big case going on. He's CID, Criminal Investigation Division. So we've got MPs, then you have MPI, Military Police Investigations, that deals with like misdemeanors and stuff. Then you got CID, which if you ever seen the show NCIS, it's the Army's version of that because they deal with all the big felonies and stuff like that. There was a big case going on at Fort Stewart. I actually ran into him. He was a CW too, and it was really cool to run into him. And then 2 of the guys I was with that went to Fort Stewart. One got out after a few years. He's actually law enforcement in, I want to say, Massachusetts. So I see a lot of stuff going on there. And then one of the other guys I ended up deploying twice with. So we ended up in the same platoon. So that was kind of cool.
So how is AIT like, especially if you're with the same drill instructor or drill sergeants, right?
So
same crew.
I mean, everything's split up into phases. You've got red phase, white phase, blue phase for your basic training. And each phase is 3 weeks because basic training is 9 weeks long. We say 10 weeks because you've got the reception. So each phase you get a little more freedom and they back off a little bit more. Red phase, you cannot do anything by yourself. Like you will not brush your teeth the right way. I guarantee it. But at the end of blue phase, at the end of basic training, the drill sergeants, they've backed off a little bit. You still have drill sergeants. They're still in drill sergeant mode, but it's a lot of group leadership within your platoon. And then during AIT, you transition to black phase and gold phase. I don't remember how many weeks each one of them was for me, but it was like halfway through, you transition from black phase to gold phase. And when we got into gold phase, I mean, we were, Sunday afternoon, we went to the PX, we could go off post, get some food. You had specific times you had to be back, but you had like an afternoon pass on Sunday afternoon to go you go do you, boo boo. That's basically what it was, and it gave the drill sergeants a break too. So, but yeah, you get more and more freedom as you go along.
Sure.
So they were still drill sergeants, even in the AIT part, but they were more personable.
And those were still the drill sergeants that you began with.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, and then you began with your whole crew, which I find that is that how they structure it for specifically the military police in order to create more
with any OSIT training? They structure it the same way.
Okay.
So
And how many other subjects or categories are in that OSIT fashion?
a lot of them are combat arms specific. So you've got infantry. Everybody knows what infantry does, but they do the same thing.
Okay.
But it keeps that continuity of training.
Right. And I imagine that the relationships that are all made between you and your other recruits, and then between the recruits and the drill sergeants. And I apologize, you're probably not recruits at that point, are you? Label wise?
Once you get through the basic training requirements and you transition from blue phase into black phase, it's kind of like your graduation. Even though we didn't have a graduation, we had a little ceremony with a bonfire.
Okay.
But yeah, it keeps that continuity.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting, and I'm really glad I did that, because if I would have done what Jordan did and had a basic training, then go somewhere else and go to an AIT, you're
having to get used to a whole new subset of people and how
you
they
get
function.
used to different instructors and stuff like that. Because if you're with an instructor for, let's say, breaking it down like in high school, if you're in if you're taking a mechanics class, and not to pose at the mechanics, but if you're taking a mechanics class during first semester of the school year, you've got an instructor for it. And then if you have a different instructor for the second semester, the students aren't going to trust and respect that instructor until they've basically proven themselves to them. So I take it as we had the opportunity to have the same instructors and drill sergeants that we already trusted and knew, going all the way to our job graduation that we did first day, getting yelled at getting off the bus.
So, how long, getting back to black and gold phase, because I may have missed my calling going to war, but at the same fact, I don't regret my decisions going into aviation mechanics, because I remember a lot of partying in my A school where it didn't seem like
we did not have that.
Yeah. So you had a weekend afternoon pass. We had to get signed off on certain like training evolutions, and as soon as we wound up getting signed off on those, which only took about 2 weeks, we had our weekend liberty passes. So we wound up getting relieved Friday afternoon after class, and we didn't have to come back until make sure that you're in class Monday morning. So we were in Pensacola, Florida, as a bunch of teenagers, and this would have been August, September timeframe. Me from Michigan, there's beaches everywhere, and the weather's nice. It is so. Yeah. Tell me about your experiences going through AIT because it seems significantly different.
So your experience when you were in boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
You had that bed. It had to be made this specific way, and you had to be downstairs for formation every morning. And just imagine doing that in your job training, because that's basically what it was. You do everything. Nothing really changed. The only thing that really changed, we were called soldiers when we transitioned to the AIT part. That was
crazy.
really about it. We did get some additional trainees that came from other jobs in the Army that were transitioning to be MPs. They had, they reclassified to become military police from whatever job they were doing before. So we had some additional people added to it, but that was really about it. Now they got the little rooms off to the backside of the barracks. They had 2-man rooms, and if there was enough for everybody to get their own room, they had their own room. We still had a giant bay that we had to sweep and buff and get sweaty when it was raining outside.
Yeah, we had inspections and stuff like that, but way different. So you get through AIT. I don't know what the correct terminology is for the Army, but like after my A school, I wound up getting shipped out to the fleet. So what's your version of that?
So I graduated on October 17th, 2003, and my mom didn't have the money to come for graduation. And looking back now, I wish I would have, because obviously you're not spending a lot of money, and I'm there for like 4 months. Why couldn't I have just, sent her some money for a plane ticket? Looking back, hindsight's 2020, but she forwarded everything to one of my uncles, who was available to come, and he is actually from, not from Michigan, but he was living in Michigan at the time, and his son was the one that ended up joining the Marine Corps that lives down the road. He's probably one of the closest cousins that I have. He's the only cousin I have here. He's the only family member I have here. But he drove from Michigan all the way to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri to watch me graduate. And he was ecstatic because he was already retired Army at the time. And during, you have a lot of family members that come to these graduations. And it's a big deal, especially because we're there for 17 weeks straight, not just a 10-week basic training. So the graduation is a little bit more involved. He had a point in the ceremony where they ask all military family members to go ahead and stand and be recognized. And he just had this huge smile on his face, like, oh, I get to be recognized, because there wasn't a lot of them there at the time. Nowadays, if you go to a basic training graduation, there's a lot of family members that have served, just because of everything that's happened since 2001. But that wasn't the case in 2003. And from there, I had to buy my own plane ticket to Atlanta. And he drove me to the airport. My uncle drove me to the airport, which was really nice because I didn't have to pay $100 and a taxi to get to St. Louis. But drove to the airport, got off the airplane, and my mom I saw her, and she had this confused look at first on her face because I didn't have holes in my jeans. My shirt was tucked in. My clothes were clean. They were presentable. They weren't wrinkled. She was like, "Who are you?" And she was like, "I'm a man now." More like, I know how to do my own laundry now. And then I was home for a couple weeks. I ended up doing hometown recruiting with my recruiter. So I went back to my high school because the school year was already going on for the year after I graduated, and I talked to people that I was in school with a year before that were a grade below me. Talked to one who was in the same grade as me the year before, but did not pass, and was back there again. But gave my story to them about basic training and stuff like that to ease their minds. And with the hometown recruiting program, if you do that with your recruiting station, you were able to save your vacation time. So I worked with the recruiting station for 2 weeks and didn't have to use all my vacation time that I've earned over the past 4 months. So that was kind of cool. And then after that, I drove down to Fort Stewart, but one of the guys that I knew was going to Fort Stewart, who he's the one that I mentioned that is law enforcement in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
He flew into Atlanta from his hometown because we all graduated the same, but he was going to Fort Stewart as well. And I was like, dude, just save your money on getting all the way to Savannah and getting the ride from the airport and stuff like that. Both of us had the same arrival date. Of those 5, we were the only ones that had the same arrival dates. So he flew into Atlanta. I went and picked him up from the airport. He stayed at my mom's place with me that night, and then the next morning, we got dressed, put our uniforms on, and made a 4.5-hour drive down to Fort Stewart, and then immediately got yelled at.
One quick question with your buddy staying at your mom's house. Like, this is something that I experienced with my parents. Like, your military buddies that you wound up bringing home, or that like your parents wound up meeting, like those military buddies are automatically adopted.
Yes.
Was that the same thing? For, like,
100%.
Like, they didn't even know these kids, and both of my parents. Well, my mom flew down to Texas to see me, but when she wound up meeting all my military buddies at the barracks, it was like she all of a sudden had one son just turned into like a litter of children that
Yes.
she we took out in town and stuff like that. So yeah, that was a pretty cool
I cannot
experience.
even begin to start counting how many people I know that call my mom,
Yep.
or have called my mom.
Within the first 30 minutes of meeting her.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know, it maybe baffles her mind too, probably, but yeah, nobody calls her by her first name.
Mm.
Nobody called her, Candler's mom or anything like that. They just said mom. She came down to visit, quite a few times down to Fort Stewart. And yeah, they all just called her mom. I think the only one that didn't call her specifically mom was my squad leader for my first deployment. But they had a completely different conversation. It wasn't, friendly. I was about to leave on my first deployment, so they had a different conversation than most everybody that I introduced my mom to.
We want to thank you for tuning in to Chapter 1 with Andrew Candler. We are looking forward to releasing Chapter 2 here in about 2 weeks, where we're going to be talking about his deployments into Iraq. We apologize for the delay as we are preparing for our biggest fundraising event of the year, our Strikes for Stripes event. We are actively pursuing trying to do a weekly release for the Heroes Debrief, but we are also managing our fundraising efforts, and we will keep you posted.